The crisis goes back a long way. It goes back really to the 1970s. By the 1970s, the two political parties, which are not really that different, they're both business parties with somewhat different emphasis. So back in the 1960s, you couldn't tell a moderate Republican from a moderate Democrat. They're almost interchangeable. I voted for Republicans back in the 60s. It's inconceivable now. Starting in the 1960s, both parties underwent a change. This was part of larger factors taking place in the global economy. The Republicans simply went off the rails. By now, they're not a political party in any ordinary sense. That's been well recognized by leading political commentators. So 10 years ago, two major political analysts of the American Enterprise Institute, Conservative Institute, Norman Ornstein, Thomas Mann, wrote that the Republicans have become a radical insurgency, rejecting the methods of parliamentary democracy. It's become much more extreme since. It actually starts with Nixon. Nixon was a serious politician, whatever you think about him. He understood that Republicans cannot win votes by approaching their electorate with their actual policies. The policies are, we want to screw you. We want to support the extreme rich and the corporate sector, whatever happens to you. Can't get votes that way, obviously. So you have to try to divert attention to other matters, not our actual policies. Like the Trump administration doesn't approach voters by saying, our one legislative achievement has been to rob you blind, namely the highly regressive tax cut. You can't approach voters that way. So you turn to other issues. Well, for Nixon, it was what was called the Southern strategy. The Democrats had supported civil rights legislation in the 60s. Nixon and his strategists understood that if the Republicans came across with a not too hidden racist message, I won't say it outright, they could win Southern Democratic votes, which worked. By the mid-70s, Republican strategists, Paul Weiser mainly, recognized that if the Republicans pretended, I stress pretended, to be opposed to abortion, they could pick up the huge evangelical vote and the Northern Catholic vote. So they all switched on a dime. Reagan had been governor of California, supported one of the strongest pro-choice measures, suddenly became passionately anti-abortion. H.W. Bush, all the rest of them. Later, they recognized that if they started yelling about guns, they could pick up another sector. And it continues that way. So turn to so-called cultural issues, keep away from the actual policies. Well, that's the Republicans. And meanwhile, they're just kind of totally gone crazy. You can see it in the January 6th hearings. What about the Democrats? In the 70s, they abandoned the working class, handed them over to their class enemy. Democrats became a party of wealthy professionals, lawyers, doctors, academics, mostly socially liberal, but no class orientation, weren't interested. The kind of people who show up at Obama's fancy parties. That's the Democrats, plus the Wall Street orientation, Clinton Democrats. Working class is left on its own, no support. So they're easy prey to the cultural issues as they are under attack, and they're under severe attack. I mean, you take a look at the neoliberal programs that have taken off since Reagan. They've had an impact. Actually, the Rand Corporation, highly respectable corporation, tried to give a measure of it. They estimated that in the past 40 years, the transfer of wealth from the middle class and working class to the very top wealthy 1% is about $50 trillion. It's not small potatoes, and it shows up in many ways. One of the ways is that people are susceptible to these to ideas that are so outlandish that I can hardly repeat them. Like about a half of Republicans think that the Democratic Party is run by sex perverts who are trying to groom children for sexual abuse. 70% think the election was stolen. These people who rioted on January 6th were honest. They believed they were defending democracy from a crazed cabal that had stolen it. I mean, when people have beliefs like that, rational discussion is almost impossible. And the Democrats have offered nothing. I mean, under the Biden administration, there actually were progressive proposals that could have met people's needs. They were basically coming out of Bernie Sanders' office in the Senate Budget Committee, all shut down. 100% rock-ribbed Republican opposition, a couple of right-wing Democrats. So nothing could pass. And the results, which are very harmful, are blamed on the Democrats. Unreasonably, but you can understand why. Well, you want to know where the country's going? They're taking over. They already have a Supreme Court, which is a throwback to the 19th century. And they'll presumably take Congress. Next president will either be somebody like Trump or maybe Trump himself or somebody like him. For Canada, this is a very serious problem. You can't escape the effects of what happens in the United States.